Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think we are now live for our IMG webinar. So hopefully you can all hear and see us, the presenters for this session today. So I want to welcome you all on this slightly sunny but rainy afternoon where I am. I'm here in Leeds, just a reflection of the true global nature of the IMG. So we're delighted that you can join us all. So just a reminder, to those of you who might be joining us for the first time, this is a webinar organised by the Insurance Marketers Group. The IMG is an organisation that was pulled together some years ago to help insurance marketers have a safe place to exchange views and ideas. And we like to think of it as a bit of a watering hole for people who are marketers in the insurance industry. One of the things we like to do as a group is share best practice, share new ideas, etc. And one of the ways we're doing that in 2025 and beyond is to organise a few of these webinars where we look to bring together experts and friends from around the industry to talk across a number of topics. And we've got a great topic for you today. So what we're going to be talking about today is content and the idea of data-driven content, and how we as marketers can leverage analytics and data to help shape our strategy and our content in the future. And we have got some amazing guests to help us cover that topic today. Just to talk to you a little bit about the format before we jump in. So we've got a couple of questions that we're going to ask our panelists, and we're going to get them to speak to those topics. But most importantly, we're going to open up to questions and a Q&A later in the session so that you guys can put your own questions to the panel. You can do that via the Q&A and chat facilities that we've got here. So do start loading those up now if you can, because then we'll have plenty to go at later on in the session. So without further ado, I want to introduce the team from Slipcase who are joining us today. Slipcase, very familiar name, hopefully to many of you in the industry. You know, they really have brought content and the importance of content to the fore in the last few years. And a couple of familiar faces. You know, they are regular at IMG events, but across a great deal of events across the industry, increasingly on a global basis. I see from their LinkedIn, they get around a bit. So I'm going to ask them just to say a little bit about themselves if I can. So Alex Hearn, MD of Slipcase, maybe I can start with you. Do you want to introduce yourself, Alex?
Brilliant, Simon. Yeah, thank you very much indeed for having us today, and thank you all very much for being here. Honoured to be on an IMG webinar. My name is Alex Hearn. I'm the founder of Slipcase. Slipcase is a window into the expertise available across the global insurance and reinsurance market. And we're also a central information portal for risk managers, brokers, underwriters to come and get the information they need day to day, and for organizations to very clearly represent their brand and to distribute their content outwards to the market.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. And secondly, Dip, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do at Slipcase.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for the kind introduction as well, Simon. But yeah, so I joined Slipcase just over 4 years ago now, off the back of a study Alex and co did with our clients at the time, which highlighted the singular area that they wanted more development on, and it was around data. So since joining just over 4 years ago, it's been a constant process of finding new ways to use data to help our clients, help marketers around the industry. And it's just been one thing after another. It's been an amazing 4 years. We've grown a lot. Our data offering is basically unrecognizable. And, you know, we're in a very exciting space right now and excited to talk about it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. I mean, these guys are in demand, so we're really happy that they're with us today. Because when we sat down about 18 months ago now, we put some questions to members, particularly younger members of the IMG, and started to ask them a little bit about what were the topics that they wanted to talk about and hear more about. And content, the inflection point of content and data was really high on the list, and something that consistently came out. So when we were thinking about this session, you know, we wanted to sort of unpack that. So the areas we're going to cover is, you know, what sort of the growing importance of data and content together. You know, some practical uses for us as marketers in terms of analytics to help shaping future use and strategy. And then, you know, something we like to do on all these webinars that we do, you know, some real practical tips and that we can take away and use, hopefully from the get-go, that these guys can instill in us. And then anything else you guys want to talk about. So just a reminder, any questions, do stick them in the chat if you've got them. So if we just go back to that sort of importance piece at the start, and I'm someone who's very old now, so I've witnessed firsthand the importance of content from a marketing perspective in the last few years. I guess why is it becoming so important? Why is that sort of digital content and branding so important for the industry today? And Alex, I'm going to chuck that one at you to start with, if I can.
Absolutely, yeah. Simon, thanks. I think I was listening back to some of the other webinars that the IMG produced towards the end of last year. And Simon, actually, your interpretation from your experience in the market over the last sort of 10, 15 years, where you mentioned that when you first started out, that marketing was a sort of side of the desk type job, which is how you described it, and it's really now become a very serious profession in the industry. I think it's just a great, in a nutshell, experience of ours as well. We've seen in the time that we've been around the sort of progression of marketing and the focus on it from organizations across the market. I think in its simplest terms, it's obviously never been more important to feature in a strong way online. Whether it's a risk manager picking a broker, or a broker picking carriers to go on a placement, or a carrier or a reinsurance broker picking a reinsurer, picking that logo on a screen is now down to obviously a lot of things, but affiliation and recall on that brand is absolutely critical. And those decisions are being made more and more on a screen, the pick of a logo A or B. I think the acknowledgement of that from the market and acknowledging that that is becoming the way transactions are being made more and more, is becoming more and more of an obvious thing. I think, with that in mind, just the idea of differentiation. There's a lot of companies obviously in the market providing similar products, obviously with differences, but similar. How do you, in such a competitive market, really show differentiation? And I think communicating, obviously most of the people on this webinar will know this sort of bread and butter wise, but communicating that difference with the expertise you have within your business is a very obvious way of doing it, and producing content to represent that is something I think is becoming more and more critical, and something that more and more marketing and teams and organizations are focused on. And with that comes the granularity. I think much more focus now on granularity. There's obviously time and space for the big campaigns, the big branding campaigns, the big splashes, the sort of scattergun push. But from a day-to-day perspective, much more focused now on, if we're going to be focused on particular product lines, how do we make sure we're getting in front of those right audiences, those right verticals across the market? And we've noticed that that's become much more of a focus. Lastly, I would say just more and more marketing pressure. I think more pressure on marketing teams across the industry as they become more sophisticated, to be able to represent that and communicate that back internally. Obviously, ideally with an ROI, a view on ROI, but how do we get as close to that as possible? How can we represent all the efforts that we're making with good data, good insights, so that we can communicate our traction and continue improving over time? So yeah, I think it's always been very important. I think as we're moving into a more and more digital world, it's just becoming more and more critical.
Yeah, great. I can absolutely identify with the pressure on marketers. This hairline hasn't produced itself. So interesting. You were talking then just about like the involvement though, Alex. One thing that's always interesting to me is like consumption. We see the younger generations around us consuming content differently, and there's obviously other channels now. And you guys, actually been around a few years now. We often talk about you as a disruptor and a startup, but it's quite a while now. So how have you seen that evolve? How are people digesting this content, particularly in our sector, because there's some pretty heavy technical stuff, right? So how have you seen that change?
Yeah, so we've also seen a massive change in that respect. I think there's a few reasons that sit behind that. Firstly, very obvious to everyone on this webinar, but obviously the world is in an extremely volatile place. It's been a very volatile few years, politically, economically, and in terms of the tech capabilities that have been introduced. And there's all of those have huge impacts on all the industries that our industry covers. So there's a huge amount to keep up to date on, I would say, as a first in what's going on in the world. And I think also, as a result of that, but also as a result of how competitive the market is, there's a lot more pressure we feel now on individuals across the market to be more informed, to have a better knowledge of what they focus on day to day, and a more context around that. We call it a contextual intelligence. So, individuals knowing exactly about what's going on in their product lines, but also all the things around that are impacting them day to day that they should know about to have better conversations with clients and colleagues and partners. We've also seen that from the company side. So more pressure on the individuals, but also much more interest for organizations or from organizations to invest in keeping their employees as informed as possible and making sure they have everything at their fingertips that they need to be better informed and to have these better conversations with partners and clients. And we're servicing that a bit more now with our API product. Without plugging, we've grown our audience very nicely in the last few years, but the sort of main point from our perspective, is that we've seen a nice increase in audience, but actually more significantly and not proportionally, more than proportionally, we've seen a huge growth in the interactions per user. So the demand from the individual over time that might have registered with us a few years ago, how their appetite has changed over the years to consume more content over time and desire more content. A lot of that is because of the reasons we've discussed, but also the quality of the information that's now available to them is much higher than it might have been 2 or 3 years ago as well. So yeah, we've seen a really significant change, and we expect that very much to continue going forward.
Yeah. I mean, that piece around keeping employees informed, that's something we hear quite a lot. It's actually not so much about the marketing side of things. It's like almost like the employee value proposition thing. You hire experts, or you want experts. How are you helping them be experts? Now, how are you helping them, particularly in some of these fast-moving industries that we serve? It's one thing being an insurance expert, but if you want to be a tech expert or marine expert, or some of these fast-moving industries, how can we make it part of the employee value proposition that we continue to keep people educated and informed? I think it's really, really relevant, Alex. So you nearly stepped into a bit of promo on Slipcase there. So I'm gonna give you that one, right? We try not to advertise, but I know there's quite a few people on this webinar who are supporters and clients of you guys, but there's probably a few people who aren't. So maybe we can just lean into what is it that you're doing with insurance organizations to help them engage with content. What are the practicals that you deliver for them?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I'll try and answer this without sounding too salesy. I think, as well as being from a brand perspective, this sort of window into the expertise that's available within a company, that is what our system does on a day-to-day basis. It's that sort of permanent representation of your organization and your experts and your areas of expertise. It's also a discovery tool for content that is published across the web that is relevant to insurance and reinsurance professionals. And that's something that we have spent quite a few years now refining and building in a way that is very much customized to this market. There's obviously a huge amount of information out there, loads of content. It is a bit of a minefield. There's sort of probably a content overload across the whole web. Too much from too many places, and a lot of the distribution tools that are out there, or social tools, as good as they might be, they're not built for the intricacies of the insurance and reinsurance market. So that was really what we've aimed to produce. And on the other distribution tool side, LinkedIn's, Twitter's, we use LinkedIn every day. I'm sure everyone on this call does. Huge value in those platforms, but I think a lot of our clients and partners have recognized in recent years is the platforms like LinkedIn more and more are built on algorithms that are charged with commercials. The algorithms that are trained by commercial numbers. How much is an organization paying? And impact that you're getting from platforms like LinkedIn is more and more now affiliated with the amount of money that you're willing to spend on it, which is great. There's obviously a place for that, but I think our focus has very much been on, we're not saying that in many ways we can compare obviously to the size and scale of LinkedIn, but we've built our algorithms on quality, on merit. So from a user perspective, they're going to get information that fits them because that's what they've told us they want. irrespective of how much a company is paid to be there, which has made a big difference. And I think on the organizational side as well, it just means, you know, whether you are a global company with 15,000 employees or a smaller MGA with 20 or 30, we don't bias between size. And if you're producing good information that fits with the market, it's a very nice platform to get hold of the audiences that you want. I think finally on that, just to say that, you know, our ambition is to provide this portal into the industry, but we also then really focus on the data on the back of that. So the sort of retrospective view on, okay, we've been on the system for this amount of time, how are we performing, how are we doing, how's our content doing in different product lines, what are the core audiences that we're reaching over time, to enable you to really clearly measure the impact of what you're doing, and then obviously communicate that internally, but also using the data that we collect, supporting our clients in their onward content strategy. So making sure that if they are particularly focused on certain product lines, that we can provide data to make sure their content is as optimized as possible for those audiences, and they get the most amount of traction they possibly can. So yeah, that's a quick view on us. Hopefully that wasn't too salesy, Simon.
No, that's absolutely fine. And you know what, actually, I think there's something really interesting there, which I'd love to explore maybe a later date, you know, on another webinar, just around trust of some of the platforms. You know, to your point, you know, money is taking people quite far these days, and we know, you know, the world we exist in is going a little bit crazy in terms of where, you know, content and the way things are amplified and dialed up. So I just wonder how much trust people have for the open content platforms versus, you know, an environment like your own. I think it's something really interesting and a growing thing in our space. So if I maybe dip to face a couple of questions that we don't want you to get out of this lightly. So, you know, I'm surrounded by experts well, in my place, and I'm sure a lot of our guests, our audience are as well. You know, how do we get them thinking about data when it comes to a marketing strategy? You know, why should they bother? You know, a lot of our experts have got all the answers, right? You know, so why should we bother, and what kind of data should we be gathering?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Why bother is a strong question, but I mean, ultimately because it will boost engagement. That's sort of kind of in a nutshell. But so in the last year, we've seen on our platform a 55% increase in user engagement, which is what Alex was alluding to earlier. But for organizations that are on our advanced analytics, that number boosted to 80%. So, you know, the data does support using the data. So that's obviously one huge benefit of integrating data into that content production lifecycle, where you publish, you measure, you learn, and then you publish again based off the learnings and iterate. So I mean, you only have to go on the Slipcase feed to see what our clients are putting out. There's some really excellent bits of content, and, you know, marketing in general, well, digital marketing and marketing in general, so much effort goes into these campaigns, and sometimes they're an absolute hit, they go viral, and sometimes they get less engagement, and that's just, you know, part and parcel of marketing. The benefit of digital marketing specifically is the data around those campaigns and what you put out is so accessible with the right infrastructure. So what that means is you can see what's done well, you can see what's done less well, both equally important, and then take the learnings from that and iterate. So maximize your chances of that hit and reduce the chances of a misstep. So that's one thing, definitely integrating your content strategy and kind of reducing that element of guesswork. And then again, the other thing Alex mentioned already was ROI. That, you know, age-old conversation, marketing, justifying ROI and spend, it becomes much easier to show that and show how you're affecting that sales pipeline if you have the data. If you can say, you know, we put out this campaign and we can see from the reporting that it was in front of these key decision makers at these organizations. And then so that removes what was a massive piece of guesswork in sort of more traditional marketing. So that's why you should integrate data. In terms of what kind of data marketers can gather from their performances, I mean, again, it's all slightly dependent on that data infrastructure that's built out. And so that's been a huge priority of ours over a number of years. But of course, top level metrics like clicks and views always going to be important. You know, see what you're getting for your spend. And for organizations that don't prioritize content so much, then you're looking at branding, views, impressions, and those sort of metrics, which obviously we report extensively on, but perhaps more with more specificity, you can get more useful insights. So, for example, we report extensively on specific topics. So the specialty lines our clients operate in, and also general interest areas that they've flagged. So we'll show share of voice against whatever competitor set you're in, carriers, trade bodies, brokers. But then how granular you go with it is, it's really your own discretion. I mean, you can be like, oh, what's my share of voice amongst all the carriers in the world? Or you can be like, all right, well, we are targeting this quarter East Coast US brokers operating in the A&H space. What's our share of voice when it comes to that audience? And so there's no real single solution to that. Every organization needs to kind of assess what they're trying to do, who they're trying to reach. But the ultimate thing is the data is out there to dig into.
Awesome, thank you. And actually, what you mentioned share of voice there, which is something everyone is really interested in, and is a great metric for us as marketing teams, particularly from a vanity perspective. Looking across our competitors. But I guess where else do we go from there? I work in an intermediated business, so we don't get that delight of the quote and bind, that click and bind that a lot of our friends in direct insurers might. So we're looking across as many metrics as we can, and we're increasingly got lots of data points, right? Whether it be on your own platform or beyond. So if I was going to put you on the spot, what are the key data points? What are the key analytics that you think our members should focus on when assessing whether content really has had an impact?
Yeah, no, that is putting me on the spot slightly. But I mean, so I mentioned already clicks and views, and that's of course important, but it's not the be all and end all. As you say, where are those clicks coming from? Where are those views coming from? If your target audience is the wholesale brokers, but most of your clicks are coming from your carrier competitors, then sure, you've got tens of thousands of clicks and it looks very pretty on a graph, but have you really achieved what you set out to do? Or maybe you have got loads of clicks from your target audience, large brokers, but then you look into it and it's all from IT or marketing teams. Again, it's great. Your fellow marketers are jealous of what you're putting out, but it's not going to contribute to that ROI. So scrutiny around audience is key. And if competitor analysis is important, then we can kind of strip it way back and away from the graphs and just look at how your content has stacked up to theirs. Seeing what were the top items of content around the space you're writing about. And then, you can look at share of voice, but also look at things like your average clicks per item, see which geographies you were successful in and which geographies you weren't. And then you can also look into that. Why is that the case? So yeah, share of voice is a very useful metric, and one that, I mean, the example is this, right? If you're a company that operates out of a couple of cities in the UK, you're a regional company, and you're on the same share of voice graph as a company listed on the S&P 500, it's not going to be a like for like, apples for apples comparison. Their marketing division could be bigger than your entire company. So it's unrealistic to kind of put yourself up against them in that sort of way, where you're putting out 3 really high quality pieces of items a month, say, and they've got people working around the clock, literally different time zones, to do that in a day. So it is important to contextualize it slightly, and look at other metrics, just like lists and clicks per item, stuff like that.
Yeah, and you've done a really good job there explaining, sort of digging deeper on a couple of those data points. And you guys have seen lots of success in the last few years. Seen your regular announcements on LinkedIn of new partners and things. And there's, again, I think there's quite a few people on this webinar in the audience who are your clients. So without necessarily embarrassing any of them, sort of thinking about those data points that we just spoke about and the use of those data points, give me an example of where somebody's really used that to enhance their strategy, to really made the rubber hit the road in terms of utilizing all this great stuff that you guys are creating.
Well, I mean, obviously I would say this, but I feel like we could go down our organization list A to Z, and I'll have something to say for everyone. But I mean, with when I start talking to marketing departments, when they come onto Slipcase, and we have that initial data chat, the thing I'm always saying, like, ask questions, basically. So one that comes to mind is MS Amlin. When we started a sort of new campaign with them, MS Amlin, like, a lot of companies maybe represented on the call here, they're so big, they operate in so many different specialty lines and business areas that they insure, but their marketing team, it's a finite resource. So where do you start? Like, I mean, we want to invest in content, but what's step one? And then so we sat down and we were like, okay, what's important? And so we created this graphic that they still get quarterly, which is we look at broker demand, broker clicks, and then we pit that against carrier output. So there are certain topics for which the broker demand and broker clicks vastly outweigh the carrier output. And so then we define these as the underserved topics. And then there are some which, the opposite is true, where there's maybe a bit of a saturation from the carrier output perspective. So then that, it goes back to MS Lamlin and they see, all right, so these are the topics that currently there is a real demand for, and their appetite isn't really being whet enough by our competitors. Let's devote some resources into that. So that's one example of how, you can use data to enhance analytics. And another one, I mean, Beasley and CFC are two examples. I mean, they've been super specific from the start about how cyber risk and content around that is a key kind of key importance to them. So they get supplementary cyber reporting on that. And I think, it goes to show, you see the content they put out in the cyberspace, and it is excellent. But again, we're not taking credit for that at all. I mean, they're fantastic teams, but reporting back of what does well, what doesn't done well, and then buying into that iterative process is kind of what this whole conversation is about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen over the years, those who have embraced it, I think you can really tell the difference, right? I think to your point, I think you mentioned some stats earlier about some of the impact. I think you see that firsthand, when you're getting content served up in terms of what's relevant to me, and when you see, so I think you've got some clear differentiation to those who are using it effectively. But I guess we're all still testing and learning, right? I think we're all still figuring it out. And one of the things we like to do with this group, with the IMG, is we like to learn from each other about what to do, but an important thing to learn about is also like what not to do. So given that you guys have got so much exposure across the market, to a number of clients, and I don't want you to name any of them certainly at this point, but what are some of the learnings? What are some of the mistakes that marketers have made when looking at this data and the performance of it?
So I guess what I said earlier about not getting too fixated on the big numbers, because again, you can't really compare like for like in all instances. Still useful, but you shouldn't put yourself up against organizations that are fundamentally different to yours. Aside from that, I'd say, well, actually, a different point, but similar start around not trusting the numbers completely, because if, say, you're writing a piece around future risks the next quarter for the insurance industry, things to watch out for, that kind of content is relevant to virtually everyone operating in the industry, and it's interesting, and it's everyone can get something out of it. It's accessible, but then if you're also going to write a report on something very technical, a cutting edge machine learning model that predicts cat losses in a certain area of the world, that is probably an amazing piece to write and create, but it is far less accessible. Not everyone can click on it and digest it and understand, oh, that's what this neural network's doing, and that that's not going to happen. So of course the clicks and the kind of feedback you get in reporting is going to be lower, but that's just because your target audience is smaller. So kind of keeping that in mind is very useful. It doesn't mean at all, don't write that, because it's still shows you in the light of being a thought leader in that space. So 100% do it. But yeah, context is everything.
Okay. So we've got all this data informing our content, which is great, and that helps us understand what's effective and how we can be more effective. What's that going to do to us as creatives, though? That's what we're born out of. Is this the end of creativity, Alex, or is there a balance to be found?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll let Dip answer this from a more data focused angle. But yeah, from my end, I would say, we would never profess to be the rule book around exactly what to do in the market to get the most amount of traction, but we've become this very effective guide, using the data that we're able to provide. And we work with some amazing marketing teams across the industry and agencies that support those marketing teams. And we would always massively encourage creativity and curiosity in the creation of content, always. And we've seen amazing results from the more creative, the more curious that organizations are, the better they often perform, which again Dip can go into more detail on. But yeah, so I suppose our angle is we'd always encourage that as much as possible. We very much want to be seen as a trusted partner that could support the context behind that. So when you're going to produce this really interesting creative piece, it's based on some really good data on what your audiences are really interested in, the key topics and the key themes. And then once you've also created it, how do you make sure that gets in front of the right audiences, however niche they might be, as Dip mentioned? How do we make sure you get that in front of the right audiences to get that targeted traction? But yeah, Dip, you might want to add to that.
Yeah, so I was actually talking to our content team about this a few weeks ago around what makes a really great piece of content. And I mean, the fact that is data incompatible with creativity? Absolutely not. I mean, that's a fallacy. If anything, what the data shows is, I mean, we don't have a creativity score as on our database, but what our data will show is if you look at content that does well, it is just interesting. It is creative, and two items that come to mind specifically are CFC again. They did a piece last year around the Kendrick Lamar Drake rap beef, talking about how the use of Tupac's voice or AI generated voice was maybe an IP issue, and that everyone, that was in the zeitgeist, that was in the news, everyone was reading about it, everyone was picking a side, and that really that went absolutely viral, and I think maybe the most clicked IP piece by Carrie last year. And another one was Brit Insurance. They did a really interesting private client specie sort of piece on insurability of collectible sneakers and shoe collections, which are also seemingly having their moment. And there's such niche sort of subtopics, but I mean, they did excellently just because the marketing team obviously sat down, had this brainwave, and yeah, love to see it.
Yeah, it's a really good example, and props to you for getting Kendrick Lamar and Tupac mentioned on an insurance webinar. Good yep. Job there.
That's £1.
Yeah. So listen, you guys, obviously your clients and your customers at the moment have got access to a lot of this, but yeah, we've got to recognize that there's probably a few people on this webinar and beyond as viewers who don't have access to it yet. So we like to enable people, empower people, and we say we'll always give them a few gifts if we can. So if you were one of our members who wasn't on Slipcase right now, what sort of trends could you share with them on what is performing well at the minute? If they were sitting down to think about pieces of content, what suggestions might you have for them?
Well, 2024, we've already mentioned, was a big step up in terms of our user engagement from 2023. But when you sort of scale that and take it quarter by quarter, there were quite a few topics that saw substantial rises in terms of what people are clicking on, what people are caring about. Casualty seems to be having a real moment right now. I think from the beginning to the end of 2024, the share of clicks that went on casualty content doubled. It's having a real moment. People are clicking on it from both sides, from all sides of the industry. So that's one thing. One thing that I found interesting was construction. Construction in 2023, I think it's fair to say, was pretty small topic for us. I think about 1% of clicks, and by right now it's about 4%, just because people are coming at slightly bigger, strategy lines like property, engineering with a construction focus. So that's been interesting to see. And in terms of trying to maximize clicks, one thing I would say is, well, we've grown a lot in our risk management audience this year, and we're seeing the sort of ramifications of that, which is our audience is really, well, the risk managers as well as everyone else, they're really valuing content that not only talks about risks and specific lines, but also if they kind of have a bit of commentary or ideas or a case study about how you can explicitly manage that risk, we're seeing clicks sort of skyrocket. Risk management now, or top articles with the risk management tag, accounts for almost a quarter of all clicks on Slipcase right now. So, I mean, that's something that we're internally also discussing. What does that mean we should do? But that's, yeah, definitely something to watch.
It's interesting. So I was taking some notes there. I want to take a few things away from this to top of my head. So we're stepping into some practicalities there. So maybe we just continue on that path for a moment. So we were going to give our members some takeaways to be more data driven. You know, what do you think those top takeaways would be? You know, what would be your kind of your leave behind for them from this session?
Well, I think the first step, I've mentioned it before, but, you know, create a list of questions. Create a list of questions that you want answered, no matter how vague you think they are. And especially, you know, if you get together as a team and in that moment you can't envisage how data could help answer that question, still get that question down, because often when you speak to data teams or you have that conversation, you can create that roadmap on how data can help. You might find that actually the capability to answer that question does exist. You just need the right calculations or just to deploy the right tools, or potentially you need to create some more extensive data infrastructure, but that's also, you know, fine. That's a learning. You can do that and then go from there. So number one, I mean, it sounds basic, but yeah, literally just write down a list of questions and see what you can do with them. And I would say this, but spend time digesting the reporting as a team. You know, reporting's there to advise and help marketing teams. You know, so, you know, scrutinize it, bounce questions off each other, make a note of what's useful, what's not, what's missing, feed that back, because, you know, the reports are meant to help you. So make them work for you, basically.
Just to add to that, Simon, a couple of points, if I may, just to say that I think, you know, what we've observed in recent times in particular is a lot of new tools that can provide good data can seem quite overwhelming on the surface of things, but actually turn out to be quite manageable. Obviously, giving ourselves as an example, you know, a lot of the obstacles we had in the last couple of years around usage of the platform was around the worry of the quantity that the organization was producing. Oh no, we're only producing a couple of items a month, or 5 or 6 items a quarter. We need to be upping our output. And actually, it's an amazing, you know, obviously the macro data that we collect, we get an amazing view on impact per item. And actually, as everyone on this webinar will know, just less is so much more sometimes, and we really see that from a lot of the organizations with a far lower output. Otherwise, just to say that, you know, there's so many new tools arriving, obviously a lot of them AI powered. I think, you know, going through the process of testing these all out, we're doing the same thing on our end, but, you know, marketing teams testing these tools out and then failing fast, realizing that actually it's not doing what we wanted to do, let's leave it and let's move on to the next, is well worth doing. And some clients of ours have done that to a great extent. So yeah, testing and measuring impact and moving on if it's not working out so well. Forgive me if that sounds very obvious.
No, I don't think so. And actually, it's really relevant to where I wanted to go next, actually, because I go on my LinkedIn. You know, I'm going to keep it over there, and I'm now seeing, you know, short form video sort of taking priority in my feed. And if I listen to the guys in my team, digital content, you know, there's a big belief in that's the type of content we should be producing now, because that's what the algorithm is giving preference to. And same on Instagram, you know, I'm served up constantly about the need to be creating reels rather than image, etc. So how do you see that impacting us as an industry? Yeah, what consumption trends are going to impact us, and I guess how might that impact what you guys are doing on Slipcase as well as a platform, right?
Yeah, Simon, absolutely. I think you're completely right. There's a huge amount of conversation at the moment around video, short form video on LinkedIn in particular, and it's definitely rewarding companies for that right now. But as we all know, that changes a lot. You know, the algorithms there change a lot over time, dependent on what's more commercially viable for them as a platform and other platforms as well. So yeah, at the moment we've catered for it as well on our system. We've done autoplay on scrolling feeds. We've tried to cater for that as much as possible because we've seen more videos being produced by clients. I think overall, though, in terms of content trends and consumption trends, our view is that we're on this amazing upwards curve of quality. And if you look at what was produced 5 years ago in comparison to what's being produced now by the market, it's incredible, the difference. And that's in all formats. That's not just videos, that's blogs, it's white papers, it's deep thought pieces, and it's quick press releases off the back of recent events. And we expect that to really continue, as the demand for it increases and as the data that's available to support it develops. We're very confident that will continue to progress very nicely. Also on the individual side, on the consumption side, I think there will be continued pressure for this sort of contextual intelligence. How do I, as a broker in America that specializes in cyber, absolutely keep up to date with everything that I can, so that I can be better at what I do and be have better conversations with clients and help my business develop and grow? I think the pressure on that is certainly going to continue to progress as well. From our end, we've put this into 3 very simple buckets. Content consumption into 3 very simple buckets. The first one is sort of general day-to-day requirements. I'm an individual in the industry. What do I need to know about day-to-day, and how can I get hold of that as easily as possible? And we're trying to cater for that as well as possible. The second one is for meetings. This is something which we went through a bit of a process on last year, but it sounds very obvious. But if I'm an individual in the industry and I'm going into a meeting in half an hour's time, how can I make sure that I have all the information I need at my fingertips to be as informed and sound as professional as I possibly can in this meeting? And we've built some really cool new functionality on our system to cater for that going forward, which we're seeing really good user activity on. And the third one is, stating the obvious, but the third one is on research. When individuals are doing project pieces internally or looking at new launches or new products, they're really going deep diving into research. And obviously that is where AI is going to be huge. We are on our end, I won't get into too much detail in this question on this, but we're on our end not going to be delving too much into that. But we see AI tools being used more and more for those deep dive research pieces going forward.
You've said AI now, Alex. They have said it, and it'd be impossible to be producing a bit of content as we are right now, and talking about the production of content without thinking about what is the impact AI is going to have. So I guess there's a number of things going on. And I know a lot of people on this call are testing and learning with AI. But what are your predictions related to AI, and what role do you think it will play in as we seek to create more meaningful content?
Well, as we all know, it's a very, very fast moving environment at the moment. I think the very obvious one is on content generation. Tools are improving by the day to support organizations in producing proprietary content. It's absolutely not perfect as it is, but I imagine that's going to improve quite quickly. But at the same time, there is this huge fragility around the relationship between AI tools and publishers, which is figuring itself out in the courts all over the world at the moment. But our angle, the way that our system functions and the purpose of our system, is very much focused on meriting and showcasing the excellent quality of the content that's produced by the source, whether it's a carrier, a broker, service provider, or a trade media publication. Our ambition is to showcase it and then to push people onto the source to consume it, which we think there'll be significant space for going forward as well. So yeah, we'll see what happens on the publishing side. I think from our perspective, we are using it in a number of ways. Our discovery tool that we use to discover clients' content and good content across the web that's relevant to our audience. We've been teaching an LLM for the last 18 months on that. It's gone from 12 months ago, 54% accuracy to now 96% accuracy. which is really exciting. That's just made our system more efficient at getting hold of this content as quickly as possible to push to the market. But also then once we identify it, it's helping us pick which audiences within the industry that it's relevant to. Some of that's quite obvious. You know, if it mentions marine, it's obviously relevant to a part of the marine world. But a lot of that is a lot more nuanced, as you all know. And we've taught a system to very efficiently help us make sure that an article that covers 15 different topics is being delivered to those topics through our system as efficiently as possible, which we're really excited about. And lastly, an obvious one, and this is something that all of you, again, marketeers across the industry are going to be looking at, but we're looking at in real detail for our own data, is the ability to pull more nuggets from it. Dip and the team are doing an amazing job at supporting our client base and pulling as many interesting bits from our data as possible to report back to them on every quarter. But we want to make sure that is always improving, and the reports are always ahead of the game and giving really deep insight to support clients on their journeys. And we're going to be using some very, very cool AI tools to support that going forward as well. But yeah, I think overall, it's a you know, as we all know, it's a really interesting space at the moment. The obvious one is on content generation, but the AI publishing world is, you know, for generative AI is very difficult, very complex at the moment. Our focus is on how to, you know, we're going to skip all of that and focus on building a tool with great technology that merits the source to the maximum extent and you know, continues to develop in the way that we've built.
Yeah, no, it sounds like the right approach. I mean, again, just working in a marketing team right now, having these conversations, you know, wanting to create standout and, you know, disrupt or differentiate, is using a tool that might largely be looking to summarize what's already been done before. You know, the right thing to help you create something completely different and new. I'm not saying it's as hard and fast as that, but it strikes me as being something to have in your mind when you're looking at these tools. That's good. Now we've got a couple of questions. Obviously, just a reminder to the folks watching, if you've got a question, you can stick it in the chat or the Q&A for the folks from Slipcase, and we'll do our best to get to those. And if there's anything that we don't get to today, we'll try and follow up via our social media posts related to this piece of content. So quite a lot of the people on this call are part of larger marketing teams, but one of the things that was one of the foundation pieces for the IMG was often to bring loan marketeers together. I mean, I was one of those. I sat working in a old underwriting agency many moons ago, and I was the sole marketer, and this group was the safe space for us to come together. So what that often means is we've got members who are wearing many hats and really time poor. Some of the things we've spoken about today are amazing, but take quite a lot of time, right? So how can our members who are tight for time use platforms such as yours and beyond, you know, to help them with this? Yeah, how can this be made more efficient?
Yeah, so it's such an important point. This is something that we come across with every organization that we work with, of all sizes. And I think as a result of that, we've had that, you know, feedback for so long that we've really built what we do around that to the maximum extent possible. So the way our system works is really fully automated from a client perspective. We build out their presence, we backdate it for the last couple of years. They then sign it off, obviously, they make sure it is exactly how they want it to be. They set the rules. So clients set the rules on what sort of content they want pushed out, the sources. We get added to press release lists, et cetera, and then we're off to the races. You know, our system monitors the web. Every time we identify a new piece, it will go up. If it's an obvious one from the client, if it's on their website, or if it's come from their PR agency, it will go straight up. If we identify a third-party piece that it might be covered in a trade media outlet or a third-party publication that we think the client might want, we send them a quick note to say, we spotted this, do you want it up? And they give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So we try and make it as seamless as possible from a day-to-day basis. And we crack on with the distribution. We're pushing out through the website, the apps, our APIs, our digests, to the maximum extent possible. And then we then come back with these quarterly reports to provide that sort of really deep dive into into how they perform. So, our hope would be that, there's the onboarding, it's then off their desk, they continue cracking on with their day job and trying to get as much great stuff out there as possible, or the quality of that stuff as being as high as possible. We're there then as a sort of extension behind the scenes, making sure we amplify that as efficiently as possible. And then every quarter we provide those reports, and we try and get a conversation at some point, a couple of times throughout the year, to give them context behind those reports and to get as much feedback from them as possible, to understand how we can improve on it, or also how we can be adjusting them to adjust with the strategy of the company as much as possible going forward. So that's a very long-winded way of saying we try and take it off the desk of our clients to the maximum extent possible, because we keep that issue in mind.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great. So, again, having worn that hat, some of these things can be quite daunting. When you get near them, and obviously you start creating a lot of data, it's often on you as the marketeer or the data creator to turn that into information. So if you've got platforms to help you with that, to create meaningful actions, I think that's great, because otherwise you're just creating loads and loads of data points as an individual, and you're not actually doing anything effective with them. So I think that's really welcome to hear, Alex. So we are rapidly running out of time. There is another question that I do want to get to, because within the IMG group we've got a few factions, and one of the underserved factions is the reinsurance crowd, who regularly remind us that we never talk about reinsurance, that we're always focused on insurance and or maybe even direct, some of the more higher profile bits of the industry. But reinsurance is increasingly involved in the conversation now. So I saw on your client list, you've probably got as equal number as reinsurers or reinsurers specialist content as you have sort of primary insurance. So what difference do you see? Let's talk to that group. What are you seeing for that group in terms of a data-driven approach to content?
Well, I mean, first of all, you kind of assumed something that a lot of people don't quite realize, but yes, there is a difference. I mean, because of course there is. The same way there are difference in habits from readers in the US and UK, from middle management to C-suite. Brokers, insurance, primary insurance and reinsurance click on different things, read different things, have different reading habits. So actually, it is an exercise that we do when we sit down with content teams and marketing teams looking to kind of attract one or both sides. So, that there are marked differences in what they read. I mean, recently, reinsurance brokers, they've been looking at more sort of regulatory frameworks, content around that, especially in emerging markets. That's proving to be somewhere that a lot of their clicks are going, compared to sort of primary insurance brokers who are kind of more dealing with, or the things they're clicking on are more to do with what's happening now, news that's breaking, impact now. And on the reinsurance side, it's a lot of sort of future outlook. How will that affect my job? How will that affect my role? But that's just one tiny example of how data can be used, and also very top line example of how data can be used to kind of help you really segment your audiences.
Okay. Thank you. Well, for the reinsurers amongst us, I hope that satisfied your thirst for a reference there. And we will, I promise, we will do more in 2025 in relation to reinsurance. Listen, we are rapidly out of time now, and I know we've got a couple of other questions, so there are probably things that we're going to have to get to post-event, just so we honour our promise of getting everyone out the door at 5 o'clock. So it's been a really good discussion, guys. I think a few things I've been scribbling down as we've been going. We've obviously looked at the importance of data and content strategy and how content can really empower you. Data can really empower your content going forward. I love the line about not getting fixated on the big numbers and make sure you get to the metrics beyond the clicks. So important. We heard from Alex, creativity is not dead. So thank goodness for that, those of you creatives amongst us. But actually, it can be made even greater if empowered by data. I've reminded myself here to make sure I check Slipcase before I go into a meeting, because it's going to make me look smarter. So that's something that's really, really important to me. And that, some of the topics we should be thinking about in 25, if we can, in terms of what you guys are seeing, construction and risk management on the on the rise, and that I think really importantly that you don't necessarily need to have a large team, or be part of one of these larger teams. It is possible to sort of tap into this stuff with the right support, even if you're on your own, even if you're a solo marketeer. And of course, if all else fails, create some content about Kendrick Lamar or Tupac, and you will see your engagement rates increase. So with that, I'm going to thank Alex and Dip from Slipcase. Thank you very much, guys, for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate it. We've got some really great insights from you there, which I know we will be able to continue to share and serve up with our members over the next couple of weeks. This webinar, if you just joined late or you want to share it with some of your colleagues, we're going to have this on the IMG website. That's imghub.co.uk, and you'll be able to access it post event. We'll also do some snippets on our social. We're going to be putting all our other webinars on there, and do keep an eye out on the website for future events. We've got a number of things coming up later in the year, both in person and virtual. So thank you again to the guys from Slipcase. Thank you to everyone that's joined us in the audience today, and all our members that might be watching this post event. I want to thank the other organisers, the IMG. We're all volunteers, so thank you for your time and attention for getting this set up and promoted. I want to do a bit of a shout out to the team at Free Partners who give us their time to support with the promotion of the IMG. And we're really grateful for that. So do keep an eye on our social and our website for the next event. We've got a couple of things coming up imminently, and of course, if you've got any ideas for future activities or events, we would love to hear from you. But with that, I want to thank everyone, wish you all a nice afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Simon.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Simon.